On this episode of the AAF Exchange, a renewed interest in the United States long-term debt crisis and an update to the state of the economy. Joining us to discuss all this is Douglas Holtz-Eakin. Doug, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
How have you been the last couple of weeks?
No complaints. Life's good.
Awesome. Well, before we jump into today, we're going to get Doug's reaction, where Doug tells us what's on his mind, so take it away.
Well, anyone who read The Daily Dish knows what's on my mind right now. I'm deeply concerned about the heavily interventionist nature of policy right now. And the CHIPS and Science Act, which is now law, is just the poster child for this. I never liked the idea of handing out $50 billion to somehow get semiconductors into the U.S. Companies like Apple have hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. They can build their fabs. So I don't see the point here. There's additionally the science part, which they're going to run through these regional innovation centers, and I would argue the government's the least innovative place we could put that money. So I'm skeptical of what we'll get out of that. So it always seemed like a bad proposition. But now the terms to get that money are things like you have to have a daycare, you have to pay prevailing wages and allow for union construction workers, and we may actually take a share of the profits. And so this is something the semiconductor firms should just walk away from this. There is no reason to sign on to those kinds of interventions. That's not good policy. So other than that, I'm good.
Sounds about right. So the CHIPS Act, that was part of this whole effort to combat China in the last Congress. And these new things, regulations are coming down.
These are Commerce Department requirements for getting the grants. Mm-hmm. And, we had all these high-profile Micron building something outside of Liverpool, New York, Intel outside of Columbus, Ohio, all of this attention paid to it. But now that they've seen the terms, I don't know if they really want to go forward.
Interesting.
And I'm also, just skeptical of the basic notion. Yes, it might be dangerous to have fabrication plants in Taiwan. I understand that. So does every company on the planet. They have every interest in moving those plants just for purely profit motives. We don't need to bribe them to do it. And so don't.
Well, Doug's reaction never disappoints. So it's almost like reading the dish every day. You get a good sense of what's on your mind all the time.
I thank you for asking my blood pressure's down about 20 points.
It's a little therapeutic for you. All right, let's jump into things. There's renewed interest in the United States long-term debt problem. Certainly this problem is far from new. I mean, you've been talking about it for quite a while. Would you walk us through the combination of events that has put the federal budget woes back in the headlines?
As you and I have discussed, if you roll the clock back to 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19, whatever, there was no interest in budget issues on either side of the aisle. And certainly President Obama never said anything about the federal budget except that the rich should pay their fair share, and President Trump didn't say anything about the budget at all for 4 years. So everyone was missing in action. So what happens? Well, we get an enormous amount of spending, $5 trillion in response to the pandemic, enormous amount of debt. We're now debt over 100% of GDP, and big inflation. And people connect the dots and think, wait a minute, this isn't benign. This stuff we've been doing actually has a consequence. And so now it's back in the attention of some policymakers, and we've got to find a way to go forward in a realistic fashion.
Yeah, so I mean, now going forward, both Congress and the administration are talking about how to improve the budget outlook. First, let's review some of the most prominent proposals from each side, whether any of these are real plans to reduce the debt and whether any of these are politically feasible.
Well, what we hear from the Republican side, let's start there, is as a price of his speakership, Speaker McCarthy is going to have to put on the floor a budget that comes to balance in 10 years. I just don't find that realistic at all. So that's a message bill. That's a vote that says we care about the budget, but it's not a way to get the budget in shape. You need to get something that both sides can sign on to. Democrats aren't going to sign on to the trillions of dollars of cuts necessary to do that. And so you're not going to improve the outlook. That's the leading proposal. We also have the whole debt limit drama where some people want to attach to the debt limit changes in the fiscal trajectory. we've done that historically. We've also done clean debt limit increases historically. I haven't seen any real difference in the outcome, so I'm not convinced that that's a way to fiscal sobriety. And the debt limit has to be raised, in my view. So, not a big fan of those. Over on the Democratic side, what you're going to hear about is tax increases. And the problem here is that it's not the debt or the deficit per se that is the deep economic cost. The deep economic cost is taking the resources from the private sector, putting them in the public sector. If you make a good public sector investment, you lose half the rate of return. We don't usually invest in the public sector. We usually hand out goodies, and so that's a zero rate of return proposition. So we're undercutting the productivity and future standard of living all the time. The debt's the vehicle by which we're doing it. Changing the vehicle to being taxes doesn't change the economic problem. This is about spending and about getting the spending to a level that's more palatable. And no one has come to terms with that.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, as anybody knows who follows the budget, that spending is mostly coming from the entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare. They're the heart of the problem. But any attempt to reform these programs is met with, crushing political blow from the other side on this issue. What is it going to take to force Washington to do something real about these programs and make them sustainable?
It doesn't have to be that way. Number one, first people have to understand there's a problem. I would argue they have no idea there's a problem, not in any deep, meaningful sense. There's not been a groundswell of attention paid to budgetary issues for a long time. No president of the United States has in the 21st century stood up and said, we are harming the next generations and we must do this to prevent that harm. That's sort of point one. You have to have a problem before you go fix it. Second thing is that the programs themselves are now endangering the beneficiaries. Right? And Social Security is the poster child for this. It's supposed to make seniors more secure in their retirement by giving them a reliable income. And since it's going to go bankrupt in 10 years, it is no longer reliable and is a source of uncertainty for seniors. That's a disgrace. I mean, that should just be fixed and should have been fixed yesterday. So that needs to be explained to people. Like, we can do better. And so changing these programs is making things better, not cutting your benefits. And that I think is the key. And for a long time, if you did polling and asked people about Social Security, Medicare, and you said to them, would you like me to cut your Social Security benefits? They said, no. If you said, it's really important for the next generation that we get Social Security spending under control, would you support that? They'd say yes. If you give them a payoff, it's a very different political proposition. We just haven't done that.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, so let's look at this. Let's look at solutions in two ways. First, if you could reform the big entitlement programs any way you saw fit, how would you do it? And second, back to the real world, if it had to come from with a bipartisan solution, how would you do it?
Well, take Social Security. If I could do it on my own, I would do it all on the spending side. I would more sharply, quote, means test benefits, because I don't think the Elon Musk's, Warren Buffett's, Bill Gates's of the world need Social Security benefits. So I'm comfortable having that sharp means testing take place, and we can get the benefits under control. That's never going to fly in a bipartisan setting. A bipartisan setting is going to have both taxes and spending in it, and so the tax increase would probably be to raise the taxable maximum in Social Security back to roughly 90% of covered wages. That's where it started. It's slipped down now. And the benefit indexing would still give everybody something. That's a universal program that's important to Democrats, but would more sharply limit the amount that we give at the upper end, and then a million other things in between. But that's the basic contours. The reason I don't want to do, in a perfect world, tax increase in Social Security is Medicare is much, much harder. And we may have to use more payroll taxes than Medicare. We don't have a single lever that we can pull to fix health care costs. We know how to fix Social Security because it's just money. Money in, money out, you can do it. Medicare is much harder. I think you should reserve any necessary taxes for covering shortfalls in Medicare, and they're enormous. So step number one for me would be to put Medicare on a budget. Right now, Medicare gets an unlimited draw in the Treasury, and everybody in the health sector knows it and behaves that way. Providers want more money, hospitals want more money, beneficiaries have no objection, and we just get red ink. Medicare is responsible for a third of all federal debt outstanding. It's time to put it on a budget and say, live with this year collectively and do something good with it. And that would be a starting point.
Yeah, it is interesting to see that finally it seems like Congress is starting, you're starting to hear whispers in Congress and even some, proposals and ideas being put out there. I mean, I think there was one proposal about raising the retirement age to a certain age. So it'll be interesting to watch how this all plays out over the next Congress and over the next 8 to 10 years as we really need to get these under control.
As fate would have it, we were talking on a day where at 12:30 I will go on TV and talk about raising the retirement age and Social Security. So yes, that's now on the table. People are talking about these things.
Good. Well, now it's time for your favorite part of the podcast. At this point, we're going to take a break from our segment called the Fact of the Day Trivia.
I do love this. I think, listeners, go get a cup of coffee. It's fine.
But actually, don't do that. All right. So what percentage of Medicare beneficiaries are covered by Medicare Advantage?
Just under 50% right now, and soon to be 50% maybe next year or the year after.
Yeah, it's at 48%.
48. Okay.
Yeah, this has also been
that's the same as just under.
Right.
You can
Yeah.
move that up.
I will give you. You get the win on this one. I think we finally have Doug's first trivia win.
Oh my God!
In the few podcasts we've done this for, but Medicare Advantage has been in the news recently, and it's part of this whole conversation about government spending and all of that.
Yeah, Medicare Advantage, every year, the CMS comes out with a notice of how they're going to reimburse in Medicare Advantage. And this year's notice is, in my view, an undisguised cut in Medicare Advantage because they changed the risk adjustment. So, like, you look at Kyle or Doug and you say, okay, what's the status of your health and how expensive are you likely to be, and you give people we give MA plans more money if they have beneficiaries who have more medical needs, and so they cut back on what they identify as medical risks, and so they're going to give them less money for the same person than they did last year. That seems to me an undisguised cut. No way around it. There's some other things in there that are the same way. So that's cutting Medicare Advantage. It's a pretty big cut, and it comes at the same time that the president is saying don't touch Medicare. And so they're cutting Medicare and saying don't cut Medicare. I don't think that's complicated. There is a sort of super geeky way to make this muddy, and the administration has muddied it by pointing out that, well, there's an underlying trend in the riskiness of the population. It's going up, and so there's an underlying trend in the reimbursements, and they're going up. Let's count that trend as something that we're giving you. I don't think that's fair accounting. That's current standards. They got that last year. They'll get that next year. That's not a change in reimbursement. That's just older populations going to have more risk. So they want to count that toward the reimbursement and say we're not cutting it. But I think if you look at the levers that they actually pull, they're cutting Medicare Advantage.
Interesting. Well, that is. Thank you. Thanks for walking us through that. But let's end today's podcast on the state of the economy, as we like to do in almost all of our podcasts at this point, is talk about the state of the economy. Friday, we had the PCE report that showed inflation continues to be a significant problem. Other reports are now showing that demand for U.S. workers is slowing. What have we learned about the economic outlook the past couple of weeks?
I don't think we've learned a lot, to be honest. We've gotten a lot of data, and it's been confusing at times, and will continue to be that way. But I think if you step back and you look at the non-volatile components of inflation that the Fed can actually affect, we haven't moved them much since last April when they really got serious. So the inflation core is still there and needs to be addressed. The economy remains pretty strong. We read these reports, like today's Wall Street Journal had a report for some private hiring firms that there were fewer jobs being posted and the labor market must be weakening. But in the actual data, you can't find it. Like today, we got new claims for unemployment insurance. They're down, not up, down. There's no sign of weakening in the labor market. And so, were it not for the inflation, we'd all be walking around saying, this is great. Economy's strong. We got growth that was picking up through the course of last year. That'd be wonderful. The looming specter is inflation and what the Fed's going to have to do about it.
Yeah, the Fed still has a long way to go. It really looks like, and I mean, their job is not getting any easier this year.
No, and I think we had this conversation before. This is going to be the year of Fed dissents, right? They were all able to keep it together through this tightening cycle, but now different governors are going to start thinking, well, I'm for stopping now. And at some point this year, we're going to start hearing about some divisions within the Board of Governors.
Yeah, and we're going to get new people on the Fed too, so
Yes.
that could also change the add to the voices of dissent on this as well.
Yeah, I mean, for connoisseurs of this, they're going to start identifying who are the hawks, who are the doves, who's in between, who's the swing vote on the Open Market Committee. It's going to be great fun.
It's going to be fun to watch. Well, it's going to be interesting to watch, we'll
Yes.
say. Doug, thanks for joining us as always.
My pleasure.
It's another great podcast and great talking to you.
Thank you.